Oh yeah. You feel that very chill music right there, Bo Daddy?
I'm grooving.
Yeah. I feel chilled up. That's what it's actually called. It's just called chill.
Nice.
That's what the song said.
It's a vibe thing.
Yeah. Do you know what the difference between chill and chill hop is?
I don't know.
I don't know. Let's find out.
Oh.
Now we're going into chill hop.
All right. It's going to be a little snappier, I bet.
I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
It's
a remix.
Theology Nerds. Bo Daddy just got back from kayaking. He realized how old he is. Maybe all that kayaking, carrying around of canoe and sleeping on ground, it maybe made him think, no, I don't need no chill hop. My body hurts. And yet it was epic. So I need some epic music. Because that's an option on here. It does not feel epic at all. Oh, Bo is back from kayaking. He's got blisters, symbols of his aging infinitude. It makes it all hurt.
Wow, you've thought about this.
They just have these new background music buttons.
Inside Restream?
Yeah, so I'm just hitting them. Sorry. All right.
Tripp,
now I can't figure out how to turn it off.
I was going to say, you definitely have morning energy right now. Your caffeine has kicked in and you're grooving.
Oh, I'm ready. I'm ready because, Bo, I don't know the answer to your question of exactly what democracy and pornography and evangelicalism and democracy all have in common.
Yes.
So
I am excited to tell you this story and to see what you would have as far as correctives or direction. Wait, Lori, are you saying that the music's too much or that my list is too much?
No, she's just mad. It has too much in common. That could be the...
Oh, they have to... Yeah, it'll be interesting. Yeah, so I'm just going to give you my bullet list, but then let me tell you how I came up with the list. So,
well, I want you to tell me about your trip first.
I will. It's
okay.
in there.
All right.
So I made this list: the gold standard, the Second Amendment, pornography, evangelicalism, the stock market, representative democracy, Methodists, Fox News, and AI at universities. That's my list of what I want to talk about today.
All right.
Here's how this came about. So as you know, I was in the woods last week. My buddies and I, he has too much energy. That's what Lori was commenting on. My buddies and I go on this canoe trip every May, and we move it around geographically depending on where guys live. But this year we did the original trip in the Adirondacks of upstate New York, and it's a canoe-only area. Connects the Bog Meadow Flow and the Oswegatchie River, and it's about 50 miles. And it was a doozy of a trip this year. So we had a couple challenges. At the beginning, the black flies were as bad as we've ever seen them. And I don't know, Tripp, if you are familiar with black flies, but they're nasty. They're tenacious and they have a vicious bite. And so we had that. But once in a while, the wind would kick up, which was great because it would relieve us of the black flies. But then we had to paddle against the wind. And that gets a little dicey at points. And then the last 3 days, it rained unceasingly, which is normally fine because you get wet, but you have a dry bag, in your backpack. And so you can change into warm, dry clothes at night to sleep. But because of the black flies, I used some of my sleeping wear to cover my skin and stave off the black flies. And getting in and out of the canoe as you go across beaver dams and blow down logs, everything eventually got wet. 3 days of rain. So my feet blistered from hiking these canoes on the portages. And when we were done with the trip, we were nearly hypothermic because the temperature had dropped our final day. The wind had picked up. It was just a tough trip. And the guys all agreed that in 22 years, this is probably our physically most demanding trip. We also had a couple guys who were recovering from illness. Like one guy had pneumonia just 3 weeks ago. So he was at like 40% lung capacity. And so we just had to rotate carrying each other's bags, carrying each other's canoes. It was an epic endurance challenge. So
do you think you would have, if y'all are like, oh, this is the most intense in 22 years, if you all went back 22 years ago and did what you just did, would it still be the most intense, or is part of it y'all been doing it 22 years?
It is a great question, and we did talk about it. So we were all physically in much better shape, but we weren't as practiced outdoors people back then. And so we've picked up some skills.
Got all your reps in.
Yeah, we've picked up some skills and some technology that definitely helps. Back then, we were very romantic and sort of idealistic about this trip. And so it was like, it started out as like a wild at heart. We survived we would only bring like a bag of rice and our fishing gear, and we would eat the fish and the rice that we brought, and like we had peanut butter and tortillas, but that was it. So we had almost no calories. The trip was much more demanding back when there were fewer calories.
Okay. JC in the chat, are we supposed to guess what it means? If any of you that are on, if y'all have a guess as to what democracy, pornography, evangelicalism, and economy have in common, you can drop it in along with Bo's even longer list that he just gave. Also, next week we really need to do the one with everyone's calls, because some people sent them in and they're entertaining. Along with, I told you this in a text, someone suggested, they were like, I think you and Bo should do the 9x9x9 challenge. And I was just like, what is this 9x9x9 challenge? And they were like, 9 beers, 9 hot dogs, 9 innings. And I just, if someone wanted to, buy a plane ticket so we could go hang out at a baseball game, I'm all down to try.
Oh gosh.
I do think 22 years younger versions of us would complete the task with a lot more ease.
Agree.
But I just thought, I was like, hey, can we get some Bible verse references for a game? And then it's like, can y'all do a sports talk radio bit? And then I was like, if it goes to extra innings, do you have to add on?
Oh my!
Right, like, oh, it's going to extra innings. Make that a 10x10x10. And so I was thinking, which was harder, Bo? 9 hot dogs.
Yeah,
9 beers.
That's a lot of processed meat.
Yeah.
Oh, Lori said she would do it.
And we'd have to agree, like, if you end up just going to the restroom in the middle of it, that doesn't mean you've lost. This isn't like a college shaming ritual. We're like, hold it in, and we can't stick hot sauce on it.
So 9's a lot of anything, right? So 9 hot dogs, that is a lot of processed meat. 9 beers, that's a lot of beer.
But you'd have to go with like Michelob Ultra.
Okay.
We can't go like 9 arrogant.
No, it would be like Coors Light or something, like the watery yellow beers. Yeah, you couldn't do 9 IPAs, right?
You could.
Oh, because here's the thing. If you just think about the volume and the calories, you're going to be so full of carbs after 9, and then you pair them together. That's just like you might as well eat 9 loaves of bread.
Yeah, well, I would think it'd be better like it is just straight wiener, no bun on those hot dogs.
Oh, no bun.
Yeah, you're just like,
guess so.
Because
do
you're eating 9 of them.
Are people doing this challenge? This is a real thing?
Yeah, I then like Googled it, and people are like, oh, can you do the 9x9 challenge at the baseball game?
But you would have an entire baseball game, and that baseball takes a while, right? It's a slower game.
Say you got 2 hours.
2 hours? Oh,
yeah. So you got 2 hours. So you get there, and
you thought about this?
like before you go to your seat, because you can basically buy 2 beers at a time, right? Per ID.
I do.
I know you do, but I meant like you're gonna have to time stuff, right? So you get there early, batting practice is going on. You get in line. You just get two light beers, maybe Mexican lager. Pound those puppies while you're going to wherever they actually grill the hot dogs, because you know how some places they have steamed hot dogs over here, but you got to go like left field upstairs at Dodger Stadium to get the grilled Dodger dogs, significantly better.
Okay.
So you go up there. There's no need to. If you're gonna have to eat some bun, you load like 3 wieners on 1 bun, right? So then you have like a triple wiener dog. So you just go ahead and buy all your hot dogs. You get them there. Now you're just munching on that first 3 stacker, and you go back in the beer line, and then
oh man,
and that way when you sit down, you've already got 3 wieners in you and 4 beers.
Can you put this comment up on the screen? Jasmine says, what do democracy, pornography, evangelicals, and the economy have in common? Straight wieners. Oh, that's
Smelled like hot dog wieners.
That is a tie-in. That's nice.
Yeah, I think she's taking the lead in the comment section. Stark Raving Dad's trying to remind us how much we're going to die if we were to do this.
By the way, if we do take this on, which I'm not saying we should, but I'd want to do it in Seattle. Of all the ballparks across the country I have been to, it has the best concessions. I mean, Seattle takes concessions seriously as far as the gourmet options. I'd want to do this in Seattle.
Well, this is not gourmet. This is light beer and hot dogs. So you want to know who has the best hot dog. And probably the place that their hot dogs are normal size. You don't want to go to a place where they're like, oh, welcome to Baltimore Stadium, only footlongs, right?
Yeah,
like, could you imagine you get to the game and
yep.
They're like, we have our footlong wieners and our quarter-pound ones. Which one you going to town on? And you're like, ah.
You know what's interesting with like the ongoing realizations with the loss of my father? My dad's the one who always took me to baseball games, even as an adult. I don't think I ever go to baseball games except with my father. And it's funny because him and I used to love to talk about how these new stadiums that they're building are such upgrades, right? They're so significantly more. Because I grew up going to the friendly confines of Wrigley Field for afternoon games before they put in the lights. Yeah,
but Wrigley's got like nostalgia bonuses, you know?
I agree. But if you've been to like, you know, in Boston, right, the Green Monster, or Chavez Ravine out in LA.
Oh yeah.
The old Padres Stadium down in San Diego, right? But these new parks like Camden in Baltimore and
that one's in the 90s, Bo.
Right, I know, but when it first came out, no one had seen anything like it. You know what's funny is you don't have anybody to talk to about it. It's like I really feel it when certain things come up. I'm like, oh, this is something I used to talk to my dad about. And it's just totally absent in my life. It's just one of those things like you can't plan on how grief shows up in your life.
Yeah. Well, I'll go to a baseball game with you. I go to lots of baseball games. I
You
like
have
baseball of all varieties. I like
you have a
minor league
minor
games.
league team you like to go to.
Grasshoppers.
The Turtles? Oh,
Don't play with me, Bo. No, the Elgin. I mean, I grew up going to lots of baseball games because that was the sport the whole family enjoyed. And then Elgin loves baseball, so he'll go with me when I'm speaking places if it's baseball season and he can go to a game.
oh, funny.
We went to a Nationals game when we went up to DC to get our international whatever travel thing approved, hoping when we go to Germany and stuff this summer that I'm not one of the people they asked to see their phone to see what they've messaged their friends about the president, because I'm just gonna be like, there's a lot in there. If you're gonna make a stink, I need you to make a big enough stink that I can monetize it. That's my plan. Like if you're gonna go there, I need you to do it in a way I can monetize it so I can use it to pay for my legal defense. But I have had a couple friends who are part of a big research project. It's a funded science research project where they've given hard times to people either that went international for their work research, right, and then come back and they're Americans, or Europeans coming here for like a research project for like, oh, we're going to come here for a week. We've been working on this stuff at different universities, and they like just start grilling a Swedish dude who's a molecular physicist and harassing him and stuff. And he's like, your government gave money for the project that I'm working on. Like, that's why I'm here. I would be here no matter who was president. And they were like wanting him to look at his phone and stuff. And anyway.
Well, no, man, these are treacherous times to travel for sure.
Well, oh, dude. Okay, you're going to start your thing in just a second, but I forgot this meme thing I saw yesterday.
Okay.
Michael Morelli, who is a Canadian theologian, does a lot on like Jacques Ellul and AI and stuff. He's been on the podcast. He's coming to Theology Beer Camp.
Okay.
And he posted this video thing yesterday where it opens and there's like images from all these different personality tests, like the Enneagram, the da-da-da, da-da-da. And he's like, does the world need one more personality test? Tangentially related to science, but only useful because of the power of projection and the universal language in which it's employed. Like this, like basically spitting on it. He goes, yes, they do. And finally, the one true personality test. And then a picture of the Ninja Turtles comes up. And he proceeds to describe how you locate yourself in the 4 quadrants of the Ninja Turtles.
Oh my.
And he's like, so I'm kind of a Donatello with a raft wing.
That's awesome.
And for like $199, you can get your profiles collector pack. It comes with a sweet color, sweet bandana on the appropriate color. And he starts going through it. I don't even know why I was laughing so hard, but I was really laughing. And
I'm actually a big fan of these personality profiles, and over the years I have found that they're a great icebreaker to get into conversation with people. So like if it's the Enneagram, the Myers-Briggs, do you remember the old one?
TMT, the TMNT, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle?
Yes. Do you remember the old one? I just lost the guy's name, Gary. They were these Christian relational counselors.
The love languages.
Well, the love languages are really popular again. That's a nice conversation starter. But no, this one was based on animals. So you had the lion, the golden retriever, the otter, and the beaver.
What about the witch in the wardrobe?
What's that?
The witch in the wardrobe.
Anyway, the reason
Gary Chapman.
the reason I bring this up is one of the things that makes me enjoy all of these personality profiles is that in each of them, I am a definitive something. There's no
Ooh,
wishy-washy. I'm not a boundary border person.
no.
I'm a definite thing in each of them. So like back in the day, when I was first married, like we did the personality profile and I was 100% I am an otter. So I even play with my food, right? That is my personality. And it's funny because my dad was definitely a lion. My mom was definitely a golden retriever. I'm married definitely to in the beaver category, the systematic, task oriented. It's just, I really enjoy these things. And so like in the Enneagram, I find myself so quickly, it's just in the first reading. I'm like,
what's your number?
What's that?
What's your number, Bo?
Oh, people guess my number almost instantly, but sometimes people mistake me for something else. But I'm a 7.
Okay.
I'm an enthusiast. And it's pretty easy if you hang out with me at all. But sometimes people think I'm a 4, which is an interesting, I don't know.
I don't know what the numbers mean in order to have an opinion about this.
You don't?
No. But
all right, sometime.
But if you are fit to types, Bo, I think which of the Ninja Turtles do you think?
I don't know them well enough. I mean, I know the show back when it first came out, but I don't know the distinctive characters enough to say.
Well, Raphael, he's cool but crude. Michelangelo's kind of a party dude. Donatello, Leonardo leads. Donatello does machines. That's a fact, Jack.
Okay.
And when the evil Shredder attacked, these turtle boys, all 4 of them, bringing their unique, particular colors into the match, like doesn't cut them no slack. I always wanted to be a Michelangelo, just because it's orange and he's cool and he likes pizza the most, which felt like a heart connection there. But if I wasn't a Michelangelo, probably want to go Donatello, because he kicks just as much butt but does it with a stick, and everyone else has blades on theirs. Like he doesn't need no metal needed, just straight stick energy.
I know that we don't edit this show, but for those who listen later on podcasts, we might have to take this whole thing out.
I don't know.
Okay.
I want to know if anyone in the chat, I want to know if anyone knows what their Ninja Turtle is.
All right.
If someone has an attachment.
Let's keep an eye on that as I tell you my story.
Okay. But if you want, we'll pause for 1 second so that when I look at the audio file, I can know where to.
Okay. We're at 23 minutes.
Okay. All right. Hey, Bo.
Yep.
So what do democracy and evangelicalism,
the Second Amendment, evangelicalism.
economics?
Yep. All right. So I get to play a unique role in this bizarre cultural moment that we find ourselves in, of political contention and cultural chaos and all this stuff. And as you know, with the most recent presidential election, I have really been trying to have an ironic, generous reading of people who are becoming more conservative. So we did an episode on Conserva Curious, and this has been an ongoing project of mine. And so one of the things that I get to do, Tripp, is that I will, for instance, call or talk to somebody in my life who was more conservative or, right-leaning than I am, and ask them a question. For instance, I'll say, hey, I've noticed that this thing irks you, or that it rubs you the wrong way and gets a reaction from you. Help me understand what's the source of that. Where's that coming from? And then I take whatever they tell me, and then I'll go, to a cocktail party or my Sunday school class, which is sort of a brainstorming session, and ask my more left-leaning, liberal, progressive friends and family, acquaintances, I'll say, hey, I asked this question. This was the answer. What do you think about that? And some interesting patterns have emerged. One of them is that, let's say that I ask a conservative friend about anti-gay sort of sentiment. And then he'll tell me what bugs him about the LGBT community, or let's say Pride, an upcoming Pride festival. And then I'll take that back to my crew and say, hey, how would you respond to this? But I do it the opposite direction, as I'll talk to my more left-leaning progressive, and I'll take that to my conservative folks and say, what do you think of this? Here's an interesting pattern that's emerged. Oftentimes, when I take what I heard from one person and I take it back to somebody on the other side, they're very dismissive. And they'll say, oh, that's just a Fox News talking point, or that's just an MSNBC talking point, or that's bullshit. They're very dismissive. And this is why I have grown fond of paraphrasing Zizek when he says, the left and the right are both wrong, but they're right about each other. Because we are far better at critiquing and criticizing, analyzing people who are different from us than we are seeing our own inconsistencies and flaws. Right? So as I have been having these conversations, I've been keeping track of things that people are discouraged about or confused by. And as I listen to more people, there are just some common things that seem to really be the source of discouragement and confusion. And this list that I made, the gold standard, the Second Amendment, pornography, evangelicalism, the stock market, representative democracy, Methodists for me, Fox News, and AI at universities, all seem to have a common source as far as my critical theory lens, is that people don't understand that these have become floating signifiers that are untethered from their original meaning and the reality that they claim to represent. And that when they function as floating signifiers, they are, we say in academic language, delaminated from the reality that those of us who may be outsiders or on the other side, or however you would see that, phrase that, they are delaminated from the thing we thought they were about. And so they no longer represent the thing that they claim to, and that in that disconnection, what we are left with is we call it a mosaic or a bricolage of leftovers and remnants of things of what it used to mean, but are no longer the reality of how it's being used today. And this creates both confusion. Like, I don't even understand. Like, for instance, people who are really into gun rights. So because somebody who's sticking up for gun rights might evoke the Second Amendment, somebody who's not into guns looks at the Second Amendment and says, but I don't understand. This talks about a well-regulated militia. They had flintlock style muskets, not these AR. Like, can't we just do some common sense gun legislation so that these mass shootings can stop? Right? And people are talking past each other. But they don't understand that the Second Amendment is a floating signifier. It right. So I'm not an originalist. I'm not a romantic. I'm not an idealist. I'm looking at this through a critical lens, saying this thing is untethered from its original meaning and no longer represents the reality that it claims to. And this is why nothing ever happens, right? It's the confusion and the paralysis, right? And I'm not even talking about, say, in representative democracy, the fact that most people don't feel represented by their elected officials, that they, because we haven't even talked about lobbying and the industry that it has become in both Washington and state legislatures, that the lobbying has resources, money, and organization. So no wonder people are discouraged about democracy, is that they no longer feel represented by their elected officials. So this level of discouragement, confusion, and hopelessness just permeates all of these issues that get so much airtime and still to this day press, ink, and endless talk shows on the radio and on our 24-hour news cycle. But they're floating signifiers. They no longer represent the reality that they originally were supposed to stand for. And so we are left with this broken, fractured bricolage situation of remnants and leftovers of previous meanings that no longer function for what they were originally intended. And so I can walk you through the list of like how this applies to evangelicals, or the economy, or democracy. Pornography, I think, is the most obvious example. Studies constantly reinforce that for our younger generation, that pornography is just warping and distorting their, not just their view of sexuality, but their very participation in it. And so the availability of pornography online has changed young people's brains. It's changed the way they relate to each other, and that actually sexual activity in, say, like the high school years and right in colleges is radically transformed, and in many cases nearly completely absent, because either it gets satisfied in this virtual way, or that it's so intimidating that people basically don't want to do it. And since they can satisfy it in some other way, and so it has changed their brains, it has changed their view of sexual relationships, and it's just but everybody knows that pornography it's not representative of the sexual relationship, right?
Well, I don't know. I thought it was just what real life was like until when I posted this, and Jez said, like, all of those lists are give the illusion of genuine inclusive experience, except pornography, because everyone knows it's fake. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's fake.
Yeah, it turns out that it is manufactured and contrived,
Yeah.
and not authentic.
Who would have thought?
I know, shocking.
I know. What was it? I can't remember the comedian, but it, like, he was in the middle of telling this long story joke, and then as an aside, he just goes, "Hey, could anyone answer me this? Like, does anyone in here have a really hot, horny stepmom?"
Oh man.
And he goes, I still haven't found one on this whole tour. And that was the entire, like, and then he goes back into his story. And then like later in the set, he then like, hey, and you know, he keeps giving what are these like contrived popular porn videos where he's just like, does anybody have a stepsister who walks in the bathroom on you naked all the time?
Oh,
Like, yeah, and oh, okay, never mind. And then he would go back to his joke. And
that's a funny way to address that.
I did too, because it gets it like what you're actually, you know, talking about, like where like the sheer complete ridiculousness of it, and he knows no one's gonna raise their hand because it's not reality, yet everyone's in on the joke. So I was like, that was really funny.
I'm going to give you a couple.
Okay, but what about the gold standard?
Yeah, let's do that. So,
and then I'm gonna guess this one is the one I have. Whenever I hear libertarians talk about the gold standard, I usually try to avoid going into like the history of it and what going back to it would do. But like, you know, it emerged for these reasons. You know, if you reinstantiate it, would do this, because then they would have to just tell me directly to their face that they are that morally challenged, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, so like this past week, Congress in America passed this big, beautiful budget reform legislation.
Big, beautiful.
And one of the interesting fallouts of it is that true conservatives have said, what the hell is this thing?
Yeah, all three of them.
Exactly. And they said, look, I mean, literally, like, so 40 years ago, when I was a big fan of people like Newt Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh, being fiscally conservative, right, was like anti-debt, and this is why the debt ceiling comes up and they have to vote to raise it. But if you look at our economy and how it interacts with, say, congressional budgets, if you try to analyze that without something similar to this idea of the floating signifier being untethered from the reality that it claims to represent, there is nothing going on in our current politics, and specifically in this legislation, that is what any of us who study it in an academic way would classify as conservative. So it's basically, it's delaminated and it's unglued from any type of representative, say like a gold standard, like this dollar is worth this much, because those who analyze, like economists who analyze this, everyone is just flummoxed and throwing their hands in the air saying we are completely what's it called when you're when the boat is docked and it's tied to the, I just lost the word.
Tethered?
Yeah, untethered, unmoored from anything that any of us understand as economic practices or principles. At this point, it is just that one team wants to spend money on this, and the other team hates that team and wants to spend the same amount of money or more, but on different things. And so this fiscal responsibility or fiscal conservatism, it's a joke at this point. And so I understand why people throw up their hands at our political system and just say, like, I want out. This doesn't even, like, the idea of this representing me or people even doing what they say that they stand for is a complete joke. It's a floating signifier. It no longer is connected to what it claims to you that originally it represented.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think, one thing that comes to my mind of like why it is this way is there tend to be like a series of emerging paradigms in modernity for the broadly liberal democracies, and we're kind of in a space where a new paradigm hasn't come in, And
Okay.
oddly enough, the only factor trying to explain post-Obama, which would kind of be the end of that neoliberal period, is Trump's ubiquity, right? And so, like, you get the New Deal gets made, but the New Deal is solidified as the paradigm by the most popular Republican president, then was Ike, right? So Ike comes in, he's 70-something% approval. He's famous for being level-headed, and it's because now the other party assumes, oh, the New Deal program, so now, okay, we might make them more efficient or what, these kind of things. But the New Deal paradigm was there. That goes until Reagan, and Reagan starts the whole neoliberal move. Thatcher in the UK, I mean, you can see this, but it becomes normative with Clinton when the other party goes, oh, the era of big government's over. You get bipartisan cooperation to do Doge like program well, but Al Gore ran it, and he uses math and graphs, so it probably worked better than using a chainsaw and 20-year-olds on ketamine. And so that runs basically through Obama, where even though you have Obama, like he did the neoliberal version of healthcare, right? Like he borrowed the idea from a Republican governor, and was like, I may make fun of him for tying his dog on top of his car, but he has a great idea for healthcare. And we obviously, the most efficient way of doing it is doing something like helping pharmaceutical companies and the medical industrial complex expand their business. Anyway, so like a part, I think, of what happened after the 2008 collapse, and you try to fix it on those neoliberal terms, it doesn't work. And then what do? Right? Well, you've got all this resentment from both sides. It gets expressed in Trump in the right, and on the left, it gets expressed in movements, say Black Lives Matter or Occupy, the Bernie Sanders, AOC group, like this kind of thing, which that party's leadership is just like, no basket. We're gonna have everyone back out butt burnt so that Hillary can win, because we love the current regime so much. We need her to be in charge, despite the fact half the country has had a hit job on her for 15 years. And then, so it seems to me part of this is we're culturally, we're aware that the paradigm we have doesn't work. And so you just see the hypocrisy on both sides. You're like, the Democratic Party doesn't even want democracy for how they pick their presidential candidates. When was the last time, those things worked well? Oh, 2008, when you pick someone that wasn't their turn, Obama, and then he wins. And anyway, so like, underneath this, I think, is the breakdown of so many of the assumptions your team plays with rhetorically. There's no, it's untethered from what they're actually going to do. And they and the sides function more as like cultural signifiers to organize their resentment, because the challenges and things we're facing, the kind of paradigm in which what are the new assumptions we're going to have to then debate it democratically and have to make compromises and cooperate and across difference, but like we need the framework, and there's not one yet.
So to bring this back to the conservative curious thing, two of the phrases that I find over and over again is that people are reacting to cultural chaos and moral morass. Those are sort of the touchstones that I find. And you understand, like, as you just walked us through, like, you can understand why people are like, this doesn't work, right? We should go back to something previous that had some moral orientation and some structure where it was better. Like, I get the impulse. I'm going to tell you a story about Methodist, and then I want to tell you about my former tribe, the evangelicals. Okay. So one of the things that came to my mind is that, Methodists don't do the methods. Most of them don't even know what it is. So the phrase Methodist is untethered, right? It's delaminated from the methods. It's just a floating signifier. And now it basically means like, oh, we're open-minded and we're open, open hands, open heart, open mind, right? Open doors. But it's untethered from its origin in the methods. So a couple weeks ago in Sunday school, I showed people, if you just Google, right, the methods of Methodists, like one of the first thing that's going to come up is John Wesley's. These are called the original questions. These are 22 questions, okay? And I'm going to read some and then tell you how my Methodist congregations, because I've done this twice now, react to it, okay? So here are some of the questions. Am I consciously or unconsciously creating the impression that I'm better than I really am? In other words, am I a hypocrite? Am I honest in all my acts and words, or do I exaggerate? Do I confidently pass on to another what is told to me in confidence? Can I be trusted? Am I a slave to dress, friends, works, or habits? Am I self-conscious, self-pitying, or self-justifying? Did the Bible live in me today? Do I give it time to speak to me every day? Am I enjoying prayer? When did I last speak to someone else about my faith? Do I pray about the money I spend? Do I get to bed on time and get up on time? Do I disobey God in anything? Do I insist upon doing something about which my conscience is uneasy? Am I defeated in any part of my life? Am I jealous, impure, critical, irritable, touchy, or distrustful? How do I spend my spare time? Am I proud? Do I thank God that I'm not as other people, especially as the Pharisees who despised the publican? Is there anyone whom I fear, dislike, disown, criticize, hold a resentment towards, or disregard? If so, what am I doing about it? Do I grumble or complain constantly? And lastly, is Christ real to me? Those are the questions. So that's part of the methods that Methodists get their name from. So I asked my congregation, would you be willing to do an experiment with me and for us to set up a class meeting and actually do this exercise as a spiritual discipline? And everyone, lifelong Methodists and new converts alike, said, are you insane? Hell no. We have no interest in this at all. Or some people said, I would be horrified if someone asked me those questions. Tripp, these are lifelong, committed, good people who love God and love their neighbor and serve the world, give in generosity and faithfulness. These are good Methodist people who want nothing to do with the methods that give them their name.
Oh, I mean, what were you anticipating?
I thought if they would do it with me, we would see how impossibly vulnerable you would have to be to participate in these methods.
Yeah. I mean, I think our culture is increasingly helping you have a reality where you never have to come to face with yourself. So all those
talking about.
And then it gives you tools where if you do come to face with yourself, it's under it's like by individual practices, right? So it's like doing it in this kind of stoic mode, like your self-mastery, or in a licensed safe space like counseling. Like, you know, you could do the same thing. You're like, so like when Jesus said, whenever 2 or 3 are gathered, like, well, here's what Wesley thought that meant. Like, he promises to be there. So here's the methods we do to cultivate that intimacy. And it's like, whoa, Jane and Bill are not my counselor. No, I got an app for that where I work on it. And yeah, Elgin and I had a conversation about it yesterday, where he's like, the accommodation to people not wanting any kind of relational friction and accountability turns like what happens when you're in a religious community almost into all education, thinking that like when they leave, since they know more, they're going to just end up doing the right thing or make the right decision. But that the kind of actual complexity of your life never gets discussed because it would just be too vulnerable or too demanding to be like, we should do this. I was like, yeah, well, I understand. I
Yeah.
what's and obviously, like, I was youth minister for mostly millennials and the oldest part of Gen Z at the end, and in order to not do that, like in order to end up that kind of stuff happening, like you end up doing something that is like way more intense than the entire rest of the congregation, where parents are like, why is my kid so religious?
Yes. Yes.
And she doesn't know if she believes in God, but she loves youth group. And she's like doing all these Christian things. But like my whole thing was like, one, teenagers say like, well, I just don't know if I can believe something. And they say some intellectual thing that's like mildly informed by like third hand Richard Dawkins. And like one option is just like looking at me like, do you really want to talk about this like science and religion or philosophy or whatever? But what they're really saying is like the collective assumptions of the people I want to look good to find this dumb. So I don't want to say I believe this, but I'm also, so like, are you going to spend all your time telling them like intellectually you could get around to doing this? Or is the whole tradition more convincing if they're in a community where the transformation, if it was true, happens? And so like I structured all of youth group around experiments where, we're doing experiments as if Jesus showed us the way, the truth, and the life. So we're going to do these things. And then you'll have people that are like doing quiet times and practices, thinking about how they spend their time and money, befriending people that they see as like marginal or people that are hurting others and probably lonely. They're doing all the things you'd think a person would do. And their parents are like, where's this come from? And also she said she doesn't even know if she believes in God. Like, or why aren't you doing your job? And I'm like, I was like, whoa, sorry. But and then the whole time, and I know a lot of youth ministers, like, if you're not an extrovert that's just fun enough that they want to keep coming back, you'd never ever get permission to do anything spiritual formation. So that's why the moment you go to big church, it's harder, because they really want you to be boring. They're like, we need to make sure we're still a consumer when we're at church. And will any of these method questions work? You're like,
So Tripp, I'm a couple years ago, I was thinking about becoming, so I'm a licensed local pastor. I was thinking about becoming an actual, like a Methodist, like an elder, we call it, like fully in connection. And so, but it comes with a lot of work, but that doesn't intimidate me. I don't mind the work. But then I watched an ordination ceremony, and they ask these 7 questions you have to answer in public. I mean, you've already answered them to the Board of Ordained Ministry, but you have to answer them in public. And the honest truth is, bro, and I said that on purpose. These 7 questions, I can only answer 3 of them honestly. That's the truth. That is God's honest truth.
I bet you know how to answer them honestly. You could answer them.
No, Tripp, these questions are unreal. One of them is, are you pressing on to perfection?
Well, and you're just like, trajectory wise, I'm hoping for it. A bit sluggish sometimes.
No.
I'm going for it. I'm not conceptually.
No, but here's the thing, I'm not. What I would have to say is, I did that for like 25 years as a holiness evangelical, right? Like always examining my heart, always striving, right, for Christian perfection. Like I really believed that stuff. But what it developed in me was an hyper sense of critical and self-consciousness that I always second guess myself and always have a guilt complex about nearly everything. So I've given up on that.
But recognizing that the form in which you did it generated a guilt complex would be, and setting that aside is actually a move towards perfection. Like the entire, like the concept of prevenient grace is, which is distinctively Wesleyan.
Oh, I love it.
is the recognition that despite our brokenness, potentiality remains. And so if one dwells and is overwhelmed, or you self-sabotage formation of virtue because you're dwelling on your brokenness, like that's like self-defeating from moves to perfection. So like recognizing the way in which you did it leads to self-hatred, then you're actually like becoming an ally with Satan, like judging yourself. And so you are moving to perfection by not practicing that desire in a way that cultivates a guilt complex. Now you're freed to walk in grace and meet the possibilities ahead. So you can say like that. This is Tripp trying to help you out.
That was beautiful, bro. But here's the thing. Like when you were talking about the algorithm a couple months ago in Lent, and you were talking about how it warps your sense because you can get these little satisfying injections of dopamine, and and you were like thinking about fasting from it, and you said you and I should do an experiment, and I didn't have the heart to just say it at the time, but I was like, I'm good.
Oh,
because I enjoy Instagram too much, right? Like if I could only pick one app and I had to choose between YouTube and Instagram, I might go Instagram.
Oh, Bo, everyone has their growing edge, you know.
All right, so second question that I can't answer with integrity. It says, are you in such debt that you would be embarrassed in your work or susceptible to temptation? Right?
Well, is answering this mean you just have to, the correct answer is no, or is they just want to know? You're like, no, I'm in a lot of debt, and a lot of it's to your institutions.
That's what I was gonna say. I'm like, yeah, I'm in debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to your school for a degree that now doesn't count towards my ordination. And in my education audit, I have to do leveling classes for classes that I have taught at the master and doctoral level at a seminary. So yes, I'm in enough debt that I'm embarrassed and that I'm vulnerable to temptation. Right? Yes, I'm in that much debt to you.
Maybe they would just feel strangely warmed by this honesty and be like, you know what? We're going to need a step up here, bro. We don't want you to.
Anyway, I cannot answer the 7 questions with integrity at this point. So now I have to work towards, but yeah, with loan repayment, I think I can say like, yeah, I guess I'm, now I can answer it correctly. But at the time when I first heard this, I was like, I can't answer these questions. All right. So that's my Methodist. Let's talk about evangelicals. This is my former tribe. A number of articles have come out recently that all have roughly the same theme that I find fascinating. And what they're saying is that evangelicalism, it has been unmasked and it is bankrupt of the moral commitments that it claimed formerly to represent.
Yeah.
And that what people are doing now is they're taking the current expression of evangelicalism and its partisan participation in politics, and they are going back and rereading things like James Dobson's Focus on the Family, the Moral Majority, the 700 Club, right? The Religious Right. They're looking at those movements in the 80s and 90s and saying, listen, you were sold one bill of goods that it represented this, and it's clear now that that was always not done in good faith, no pun intended, but it has always been about power and control. And it was never about the things that were sold to you as the window dressing, that the machine behind the window has always been this mechanism, desire for control and power. And it's just been unmasked. It's not that the nature of evangelicalism has changed, people are claiming. It's just now that it's been laid bare and is naked for everyone to see. So as a historian, right, and a researcher, I think about things like there was this guy Bebbington, and he did a historical analysis of the original evangelicals, which were actually on the other side of the Atlantic, right, in an English context. And David Bebbington says, that evangelicalism really is about four things. It's biblicism, that the Bible's the ultimate authority. It's cross-centered, that it's Christocentric, that it's conversionistic, that you have to have a personal experience of conversion, and that there's an activism, a calling for personal transformation and transformation of society, right? That those are classically the four things that define evangelicalism. And people are just saying like, hey, that may have been true 100 years ago, and it may have been true in England, but American evangelicalism, it has either moved, right, as a floating signifier and is untethered from that reality that it claims to be derivative of, or that it has become delaminated, and in that it's exposed that this has always really been about is power and control, and not the moral framework that was presented to us who were raised in it in youth group and Sunday school. It's a floating signifier. Evangelicalism just simply doesn't mean what it used to mean.
But the question you're talking about in these articles is whether or not it was always like was the engine of it the whole time what has become more transparent in the present, or did it migrate?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Is it a migrating signifier, or has it just become exposed? Right. And this was always true. And so that's why people are doing retroactive hermeneutics. They're going back and reading that through the current expression.
Yeah. It's and one of the things I think that makes that complicated is the, over the last 20 years, the number of people who, even in the present, if you took the old definition or form of life that, oh, this is what an evangelical's like, the number of them that then become the ones being kicked out, right? Or whatever, or they're like speaking to their own community on behalf of just what everyone has always said was their legacy or distinctive features. They're like, oh, what are you talking about? I find like when Russell Moore reflects on it, fascinating, because he was part of the whole takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention, and then years later is like writing a book like, I can't believe they're doing this to me, and you're like, well, I can see why that would be troublesome, but it's not like that playbook is yours repurposed, right? So it's complicated, right? Because the in a sense the playbook is very similar, but who the objects are for the whole purification just gets more and more narrow, while the identity of evangelicalism moves from primarily a religious moniker to a political one, right? And so
two last things that I want to, so that we can bring this to a conclusion, two last things I want to touch on. One is, when it comes to the stock market, when people study how stocks used to operate, right, and that in corporations there was actually a board, right, of shareholders, and that the, say, CEO was accountable to the shareholders for the bottom line. But we have moved so far from that in the current stock market that it no longer works in that idealistic way, right? And so some romanticized notion of the CEO or the shareholder, the stock market, that now, because of futures and speculation and how it manifests in reality, is that, like, I inherited my parents' retirement fund, okay? And I rolled it into my very small retirement fund that I have as a clergy person over the last 30 years. And so let's say I have, $137,000, okay? That's in my retirement. Then the Trump administration comes in and they make a bunch of changes on day one and do this tariff thing, and the stock market reacts. And then I find out I actually don't have $137,000, right? That money that I was told was there now is not there. So I never really had it. And it might come back, right? But it might not. And so the money that I thought I had to retire, I no longer have, which makes me ask, did I ever really have it? Right? It's just a number. And so people have a tough time conceptualizing. This is why normal people like me can't get our minds around Bitcoin or currencies like that are blockchain related, is that it doesn't make any sense because it's conceptually so different than how we were told the economy works. So between the big, beautiful budget reform bill that went in, the stock market crashing because of these tariff things, and then Bitcoin investors putting money in the president's pocket for influence, like the economy doesn't work the way that you learned in social studies and civics in elementary school and junior high. So that like romanticized originalist, idealistic sense that we think the economy actually has some basis in anything at all, right? Like the gold standard. And it doesn't. I understand why people get discouraged and frustrated and hopeless about the economic prospect of, right, what was promised to us, that if we work hard, that we can have this kind of a life and then, right, retirement, and that there was anything to count on at all. It's all shifting sand. And because it's all now what we're calling floating signifiers, there is no there when it comes to the economy. And so people feel very vulnerable and they feel exposed and frustrated, and I get it. And so this is why the conservative curious has an appeal, because it is a reclamation project to go back to some and reclaim some romanticized notion of when things actually meant something and you could count on anything. I get it.
Yeah.
Because this just feels like
after you're like, look, if you aren't going to talk about the methods, we're going to talk about this.
All right. So one last thing I want to say, and why this list, like the other morning, I got up super early. I think I was still on East Coast time. And I just got up super early. And so I had several hours to myself in just quiet reflection. I went for a walk down by the river. And I came up with this list. I think why it has gravitas for me, why it has a pull in my mind and heart right now, is because I am frustrated by what I am hearing both from my left-leaning, liberal, democratic, progressive friends on that side and my more conservative and becoming even increasingly conservative friends and family on the other side. It seems to me, Tripp, that the right is lost in some kind of romanticized notion of an imagined past and has undertaken this reclamation or retreat mentality that while I understand the impulse, the thing I can't quite comprehend is the cruelty to take it out on the most marginalized and vulnerable in our society. And that when I ask those follow-up questions, what I'm hearing and what seems to be becoming clear is that the cruelty is not a bug in the system, it's a feature. That some of the point is to actually be mean to those you don't like. That it's not an aberration, it's a feature that when it comes to, let's say, this upcoming Pride Festival that we have here that we're going to participate in, that if you don't like people who flaunt their different sexualities or their body positivity or their promiscuity, if you don't like them, then the legislation and the mechanisms that are available to us, it actually is appealing because you don't want to see that stuff on TV and you don't want to have to describe to your children, you don't want to have to answer their questions about why somebody can fly their freak flag. That's actually, so I can't quite get my head around that yet. I'll keep asking questions, but so that's on the right. They're lost in this romanticized reclamation project, But then I think the part that's more frustrating to me is that my left-leaning progressive friends have this impotent inability to muster anything beyond identitarianism and word policing. And it's such a feckless response that it's not even a program that you can get excited about because it's so one-dimensional. And like when something comes up, and I'll give you an example. Statistics say that there are more people in slavery today than when slavery was legal. And the only thing that the left seems to be able to come up with is word policing. That I get corrected when I talk about prostitution, and somebody will say, we talk about sex work, right? And I will say, no, I understand sex work. A sex worker, definitely, right? But there's also prostitution, right? Like, they're like, we don't want to use the P word.
Watch out.
And I'm like, you're the problem, right? To address the human trafficking and sexual slavery, right? Because you would rather empower people as sex workers than deal with the fact that prostitution is an actual horrific presence in the world. And it's just such an impotent, feckless response of word policing and identitarianism that I think this is how we're going to combat the world's great problems. So I'm frustrated.
Oh, no way. You're frustrated, Bo. I'm a
little frustrated.
This is easily your most intense opening framing riff. Like normally when you got something you want to talk about, you got like a provocative 15 minutes. This is hardcore. Like this is so just, someone's there is probably sitting there like, this is the most Bo's talk to set up the topic. And no wonder you're like, can you cut out your Ninja Turtle aside? Because you were sitting there with 40 minutes in your pocket going like, man, I'm ready. It was intense. Okay. So, I have an idea I've been thinking about, and I was trying to decide whether or not I found it compelling, and you just made me find it more compelling.
Okay.
So,
I mean, give it to me.
All right. I've read 2 books by Andreas Reckwitz, who's a German social philosopher, theorist, sociologist kind of guy. He's primarily a sociologist, but then does like social philosophy, not just looking like a sociologist looking at a particular very small thing. He's like tries to talk about the macro movements sociologically. So sometimes it gets labeled social theory. So some sociologists don't do theory anyway. Okay, so he and here's why I thought of it, because he was talking about in the book how, like I mentioned earlier, how when you get to a point where the paradigm of the different political parties, be it two-party system here in Europe, you have multiple parties, but they have these same things, and there's these cultural shifts that are animated by the big economic shifts, that they're kind of like reciprocatingly cycling through each other, where these economic pressures, then the cultural shifts are happening, and that move from the neoliberal version of global monetization into the kind of hyper financialization that's decoupled from particular nation states has generated a place, especially with the growth of technology, where if you take like the economic structure, like neoliberalism in its and the New Deal areas, when they were stable, you had a thick in the middle class, right? So then the parties and the different poles are managing shifts, but the structure is the same. Our economic shifts, it's like taking a belt across the middle of the middle class and tightening it. So now we get in this hourglass shape.
Okay.
And who gets moved down to kind of the precarious class of like lower middle class, working class? There's a whole bunch of people that would have self-thought of themselves in the stable middle that get moved to a precarious class. And then the people that aren't historically wealthy that make it above the belt are the ones that tend to hyper compete in an increasingly small space, right? So you get where our generation and then our kids' generations and so forth, you don't actually anticipate them staying at the level you're at if you're in the middle class, unless they outcompete their peers, as opposed to New Deal. It was a collective project. And then in the neoliberal status, it's like, oh, well, the story is of meritocracy, and you get in locations and there's an ongoing relationship between employer and employee. You got the benefits of the New Deal, benefits of organizing and stuff, all of which have kind of slowly been eaten away in the neoliberal context. So you get this thinning, and he makes this point that the cultural shift in it is a shift towards what he calls a society of singularities, where you value unique entities, experiences, individuality, particularity, in contrast to kind of industrial modernity's focus on standards and uniformity, where you would go, oh, here are our methods, right?
Right.
Okay. This logic of singularization, he's like, the trick is it's not just about individuals seeking unique identity, but also collectives striving to be perceived as singular communities. And so the cultural shift, you end up with two forms of the kind of the rise of culturalization, where the conflict is between what he calls hyperculture and cultural essentialism. Hyperculture are like the people with humanities degrees, where it's associated with individuals striving for self-development. You draw from diverse cultural resources on a mobile global market. It's cosmopolitan, open to cultural diversity, and it's linked to that new middle class, those that above the belt tightening. And so that singularization, that uniqueness, is something you want to create space and freedom that's protected for every individual to be who they are. So I put my pronouns in my bio. You have a multiplicity of growing markets and silos. You have all these kinds of things where the imperative for your cultural, where you're waging political power in this cultural space, is to preserve for each individual to be unique in particular, right? And so you feel threatened by anything that compromises the freedom to be an individual. And so you're like, obvious, like that's why straight people go to Pride, not because they're gay, but because, we celebrate this freedom, right? Now take the other group. He's like, then there are this whole other parts where what is essential, the singularity, is actually the collective culture itself. So it's based on rigid boundaries between in groups and out groups. Who's a true American? It seeks homogenous collective identities, often religious or ethnic or regional or national, and it's anchored in a particular collective and its group identity, which that group is like, it believes it possesses an unassailable authenticity as a true American or a Christian American, or insert any of them. And he gives mostly examples from Europe. But cultural essentialism emerges as a counter movement to hyperculture, this the freedom desire for this unique particular individual, and is in it, and they frequently interpreted as so then that desire for freedom, protecting it and stuff, is experienced as a threat to society's order, to its identity domestically, its uniqueness globally, right? And so when you think that there are these two different cultural regimes in our kind of late modern context, of kind of hyperculture and cultural essentialism, both of them, right, when you say they understand the other's problems but not their own, because the other's problems are in fact experienced as a genuine threat to their identity. So when one group's like, no, we're enforcing these bathroom laws, you're like, that is an attack on some people. And they're like, you're imposing your stupid cosmopolitan whatnot that you probably stole from France. This is what goes. And you're like, you're coming in to our a rural school in flyover country and telling us we need our bathrooms to be structured like Los Angeles. What are you, commie? Blah blah blah. And so that this conflict ends up manifesting as identity conflicts rather than traditional class struggles. And so it sets up a kind of socio-structural polarization. So as you transition to late modernity, there's this polarized social structure. And if you look at the two groups, the winners economically tend to be the global upper class, highly qualified people whose gifts and abilities thrive in the new middle class in the global north. They orient themselves towards like self-actualization, these kind of things. And the losers economically are the new underclass, parts of the old middle class who got pushed down, who experienced social decline, cultural devaluation, and that polarization between the old and new middle classes he's like, that's actually the most significant factor driving so much that's going on, because whether or not it's transparent to themselves, they recognize one of these cultures is going to have political power. So you were going to go along with the entirety of your team's regime because it's articulating itself and it's displaying its power on a cultural space. And it sets up, for political polarization where there's liberal cosmopolitanism and right-wing populism. And it makes one's political identity now the rallying point, right, for combative identitarian politics. It is collective identitarianism or individual identitarianism, and each side thinks the other one is the one imposing some crazy idea. Like, why are you going to tell all Americans what America's supposed to be? And the other ones are like, why? But see, they both would say that, right? Like, you're telling people they can't be X, Y, and Z, and then they're going, you liberal cosmopolitans are telling us we have to make space for this crazy crap that's just not American. If they want to live here, they can speak English and listen to Skinner, and I just found that like that dynamic and description I found really helpful, and I've been thinking about it. And then the moment you start going through those things, like, why are they master signifiers without a referent point? Because we only have the discourse of the old. We don't have a new framework.
I like
it. Yet this our economic situations generated an anxiety expressed in combating cultural identities, and so it makes me think, oh, if we want to address it, if we're trying to get to a place where you don't function that way, oddly enough, the things to actually address are like basic material reality questions, and not put all your energy into battling identitarian fights, because you're actually way more open to recognizing the viability of another when your basic needs are met and you aren't experiencing yourself as precarious, right? So anyway.
Man, I really like this. It's helpful And I'll have to look up those books that you referenced. I'm not familiar with them, and so maybe that would be a good next chapter for me. I can tell you there's so many funny examples that I could give you about situations that I just want to throw my hands in the air. I overheard a conversation. I was part of a group. Overheard a conversation from somebody who is newly woke and doesn't have all the terms down yet, and was corrected by somebody who is, deeply steeped in political correctness and identitarian politics. And it was just like one of those moments. The person was trying to say like gender neutral bathrooms, but I think they used the phrase unisex. And then the other person corrected them to say it's actually non-binary. And it was like the perfect snapshot for me of if the left, right, they're trying to have the right conversation about dignity and accessibility, right? And but because of the word policing that is so intrinsic to that perspective, it was like getting caught up in the language instead of addressing the actual material reality, right? Like concrete existence, literally concrete, of accessibility. And I just, for me, it's those conversations. Like we were doing a thing where we're getting ready for a suicide prevention event, and a well-meaning clergy person in the room kept correcting people and saying that, like, oh, well, we use this phrase now, unaliving, right? We don't say people killed themselves. We don't say people took their own life. We don't say committed suicide. We use this phrase now. And it was like, hey, I'm living in a community in which suicide prevention awareness is deeply needed because we have an epidemic, especially with our young people. And it is a real need that is impacting families in deep and powerful ways. And if you want to introduce a new term, and that's like your big thing, is that we have to talk about this, right? Like, I just saw the tension in the room of the reality that we're trying to address versus the vocabulary that somebody wanted to impose, this updated thing. And so between transgender accessibility to unisex or non-binary or gender neutral bathrooms, and this real deep need of suicide prevention awareness, and the word policing of, right, it's these conversations that I understand why my conservative friends and family, when I talk with them, they just have no interest in what is happening on the, let's say, the other side of the aisle, because in their lived reality, this is not the most pressing or relevant thing, because they have concerns about like how they're going to put food on the table and, right, how they're going to do this. And I get where people are frustrated and where the appeal towards returning to some, attempt to reclaim a moral structure and a civil orientation of a previous, manifestation. I get the appeal of it. I really do.
Yeah, because like to have a group of people working on a specific issue,
yeah,
and then one person is like, actually, we need to make sure that the current language cultivated by hyperculture and our distinct, unique particularity is expressed here. Otherwise, I need to win at the linguistic level to support and legitimate the superiority of my tribe's identity in order to partner with you to address anything. Like that's how it's received. And now for the individual doing it, they're being conscious of language for real reasons, right? Like the explanations of it are understandable, and you especially understand how someone that comes out of that cultural space is like, this is being more thoughtful, right? Like, when you say sex worker, it's a more inclusive category than prostitution. And there are people who, because of, purity laws in this one space, or blah, 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 blah. And I want to protect someone's freedom to, with their own agency, engage in something that is just not socially and politically protected. And the other person's just like, yeah, but what about poor kids that get brought into something and blah, blah, And then what's the response? Is like nothing happens. And then all of a sudden the cultural collective identitarians are like, nah, we want to protect Andrew Tate. And and the other ones are like, we want to have tax-free tips on sex workers on OnlyFans. And then you get right. But the thing I found that was helpful reading Reckwood's is the way in which that desire for a more accurate use of language on behalf of the recognition of the experiences of these particular groups is then experienced in the advocacy of a more attentive use of language as cultural superiority by all the people you actually need as allies to address it, including the people you're standing up for, right? Think of the debates on, when we were at Claremont as to like, are we going to use Latinx or not, right? And I remember the moment where it was the actual Latino students. They're like, this is stupid. And they're sitting there doing like a PhD in ethics, and it's the white kids telling the Hispanic kids, they're like, do not use Latinx. That is just stupid white talk. And you're like, okay, but if I was only with my white friends and didn't use it, I'm going to get in trouble. And they're like, that's because y'all are ridiculous. And
I remember this.
And you're sitting there going, or the other one that happened right on Ethnic Food Day, when one group is complaining that the Koreans made Korean barbecue. And they're like, well, was this ethically sourced? And what about the vegans or whatever? And the Korean students are like, it's Korean. It's like, what do you want to hand out to everybody? Just kimchi? Like, like it was one of those moments. And I just remember being frustrated with it then and going, oh, this is not good. But it's like later looking back, you go, oh, this was a police. So if you've been experiencing that whole time, and then you're like, well, why did a whole bunch of younger people in different ethnic minorities respond to Trump? Part of it's because they're like liberal friends are like, no, here's what we really need to call you. And also I know your communities don't have the same cosmopolitan sexual ethics, but we also need you to genuflect towards those identities, how we want you to as well. And we're probably, like you just start going through it and you see what's happening. And I saw I think it was in the Atlantic, but it might not have been, but an article looking at the shift to Trump voters in ethnic minorities, but gauging it on class analysis. And so like if your family's income is 80,000 or above, Kamala actually made progress, like even more progress than before, in Hispanic and Black communities, Asian communities, these kinds of things, right? But if you're below that, the lower your family's income, the more gains Trump had. And even though, right, like everything that's happening in the big beautiful bill is undermining their physical well-being, right, which will drive identitarian people nuts. Then you go, oh well, but they experience you and your language and identity policing as like that you really have a superiority complex, that your culture is better and you need to be cosmopolitan like me. It's someone needs to tell everybody that identity politics isn't the gospel.
They should. You know what that makes me think of? So my friend and mentor Randy Woodley, Native American scholar, often is asked by somebody at the beginning of one of his presentations or history lessons, they'll say, what so I don't know how to frame this question. I don't want to be offensive. Do we say Indian or do we say Native American, or like in Canada they say First Nations? And one time Randy said, I'll be honest, it doesn't matter if you treat us like shit. It doesn't matter what you call us if you treat us like shit. And he said the ongoing reservation economy and cultural genocide, it doesn't matter what you call us when you talk about us, if you're gonna allow these policies and attitudes to persist. And I was like,
does he
well,
feel better if you do nothing but had a land acknowledgement before?
That's what I'm talking about, the land acknowledgement. Oh, here's another weird thing. Can I just throw out one more weird thing? You know what? You know that list I came up with? Here's you know what triggered it? Canadian Parliament. You know, I'm a dual citizen. Canadian Parliament this week, they brought the actual King of England over.
Yeah.
To do the King's address.
To basically troll Trump, right?
They were trying to signal to President Trump. And in Canadian culture, there was a huge debate that, especially from Bloc Québécois, who protested, didn't show up for it. The voice of resistance said, are you telling me, think about what you're saying. You're telling me that the best way to signal to the American president that Canada is a sovereign nation is to bring over the monarch from the previous colonizer to give the speech. How in the world does that signify or signal Canadian sovereignty? And I just thought, my God, it's another floating signifier. And then my matrix brain just started running down a list of things that don't mean what they used to mean anymore and don't signal what we think they do.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, I mean, you know, Americans used to just think it was funny that, you know, the king and queen, you know, still have all these roles and stuff. And,
yeah.
And now they're like, well, I don't know. I mean, now I'm kind of jealous Bo's got dual citizenship.
You know what'd be interesting? Because there is a lot of conversation right now, especially for academics and students, about crossing the border in both directions, right? So some people are concerned, like, as Americans traveling, because you have to come back, and vice versa. And some of the concerns that are being expressed about whether it's ideas or research or position, it really is an unprecedented situation that feels, and I understand why people are talking about, 100 years ago, that this feels reminiscent of an authoritarianism and a fascism of fear. I get why people are drawing the comparisons. Now, because I do critical theory, I chart the differences, right? And try and attend to how things have migrated, evolved, and changed. So it's not exactly the same, right? It's not apples to apples comparison, but I do understand why people think that it is reminiscent of a previous era of fear and intimidation.
Yeah, I heard people complaining about, like, Timothy Snyder, wrote the, like, multiple books on, like, tyranny and how authoritarianism works. And then he goes and moves to Canada, and they're like, and they were giving him a hard time. And I was like, well, that at least is a signal that he believes what he's saying, right? Like, I kind of thought he was hyperbolic on certain things, or exaggerated the connections in the present. That there's, like, the difference between the Weimar Republic being relatively new and weak and impotent, and whatever, like in a month, Hitler takes the whole thing over. I was like, that's not the world we live in. In America, there's a lot more, going on. But I was like, hey, at least he's like really acting on what he really believes. And I really feel like there's a deficit of that in most people. They got a whole lot of beliefs that have very little action compelled to it. Like if he really believed that's what's going on, then it makes perfect sense. Be like, oh, I'm a very famous historian, and now I can get paid to be a famous historian across the border where I don't have to worry about anything because I think the threat's real. I was like, oh. But it was funny to see people like, why would you leave? Blah, 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 blah. And I was like, because he believes what he said. He's hiding. I am the, like, it is, you could imagine like 5 or 6 different things being true 6 months from now, which you go back to what you were thinking then and you're either like proved right, or
Yeah.
you just look like you're overly worried about something or you're deficiently concerned.
Yeah.
But every time I start to like talk myself down from being worried about things, I just think back to what you said earlier. Like I used to complain about all my progressive peers.
Yeah.
Into it, like projecting upon all evangelicals this. Like they're not all like that. Like you obviously haven't hung out with them. I know some of the greatest people I know. They just really think it matters that there is a historical Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
But like they are probably the best people to have as neighbors, and this kind of thing. And I would defend them, and then turns out, nah. I think what gets me is like, and this actually makes more sense, kind of like a Rick Riggs thing. Is that like Donald Trump is probably the least Christian president we've ever had.
Yeah.
Not only does the man not know anything he has to ask for forgiveness for, which is just generally triggering, considering, think of how back in the early days of TNT, when evangelicals got so mad all the time that when our anthropology wasn't bad enough, right? Like they're like, y'all don't really believe in sin. It's all just social things. You don't think human beings have like their own real problem. And people give us a hard time, like, oh, y'all don't even believe in sin anymore. And now Donald Trump, the least Christian president ever, he has no interest in even feigning Christianity. He's able to purge himself from all like hypocrisy of any Christian seeking power. So like every other president we've had, genuflexing something towards Christianity, and you understand like, oh, this job is inherently compromising, like you have to do all this kind of stuff, and you're like, we need someone who knows they're in a dirty business, and so they feel a little guilty about it, so they might have to be a little nicer. Someone like George W. Bush, where made shit up and killed lots of people in Iraq, but he also got guilted into saving millions of lives in Africa with HIV treatment, that Donald Trump was like, we can put an axe to this because I'm making America great by killing lots of people in Africa for kicks and giggles, so I can expand the military budget and pretend I'm trying to help America and become fiscally sound. And so like his unapologetic commitment to exercising power with no confines of a moral framework or the Constitution, and like, who are the people that are most pumped about it? You're like, come on. And but then you also know, like, who's the president in recent memory everyone's like, oh, he's the least effective one? Jimmy Carter, because he was probably too Christian. He was too humble and too concerned about certain things, and then just felt guilty and didn't exercise power and stuff. And they're like, this is what happened the first time we got a real Bible believing evangelical in the White House. What we really need is someone as far from that as possible. We need someone where his own kids know he is just morally inept and a vile human being that's animated by resentment, selfishness, with no integrity or connection to reality, and is willing to make it up. That's what we need, right? And so, like, I'm just, you sit there and you're like, where the hell did this come from? Where like you got mad and lost your biscuits because Bill Clinton said, problematize the to be verb and around his sex, right? Like, he ends up getting in trouble for lying by being ambiguous about the to be verb there. You know, like, well, what is? And you're like looking at that and going, well, would it have been better if Bill Clinton had said what Donald Trump said on? Look, I'm rich and famous, and they want me to do it. Just grab them by the pussy. That's how it works. And so, like when you're looking at this situation, part of it, you're like, what makes you do that? Someone's going to exercise power without integrity or feigning any of it. Well, if you experience your whole, if you're sitting there and like we're cultural essentialists, like we really do want our culture. What is unique and particular about it, where identity is grounded, is a kind of homogenous collective identity that's under threat. Then someone that just has all the right enemies and there's no limitations on doing something. Like, look what we did. We were trying to play by the rules and be compromising, and then you get a voter failed, ruling, and now gay marriage is legal. So we need someone to demonstrate that true power is exercised by being the antithesis of anything Christians ever thought. We need someone who would be triggered after the first question of the methods and could not consider ever asking any of them.
Oh my goodness.
Or he might answer them all honestly, and it would be depressing, right? Like, do you ever think one of them's like, oh, do you think through how you look at other people and give yourself more priority and are not honest with blah, 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 blah? And he's like, what? I think about other people all the time and how those commie, socialist, blah, 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 blah. Like, is like his Memorial Day post.
No.
Oh God. It was like Memorial Day. You're looking at people that died for the country, and he's like, I can't believe people died for insert, all where basically like half the country is the problem, and you're like,
oh no,
you're like, come on, or the nothing was more revealing than on that May the 4th day that his Star Wars AI generated thing is him ripped holding a red lightsaber while associating himself in the post with the rebellion, and you're like, yeah. Yeah. And apparently evangelicals are the Jar Jar Binks of American democracy. They're like, Amisa Gunza gives him imperial power.
Oh no.
A state of emergency.
Tripp, as a theology nerd, I feel the compulsion to end on a constructive note.
Oh, good. Did you write this down?
Yeah.
You have a construct. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I'm not. I
so
don't.
Somebody
right now.
If somebody's like, all right, I see what you're saying. It's a mess, and things don't mean what they used to mean, and right, and you can't count on anything. There's no there in most of this stuff. What do we do? So here's my oversimplified constructive proposal. It's a triple A. Okay.
Ooh, all right. It's already branded too.
Yeah, I've already alliterated it because I'm a preacher. So here we go. We need to acknowledge that things have migrated, evolved, and changed. We need to account for this floating signifier that it no longer represents what it used to, and attend to the actual lived realities that are impacted by it. So like Billy Farley says, the reality is my gardener and his family is very worried about being picked up by ICE, even with verified and valid green cards, right? Our community lunches on Sunday, and we just had a party in the park to invite all our neighbors. It was a much smaller crowd than last year. And part of it was because Memorial Day fell after school had let out here, so a lot of people are traveling. But it was also very evident demographically, racially, and ethnically that we were missing many of our immigrant and refugee communities that came to the party last year. And so these are my 3 A's: acknowledge, account for, attend to. And and it's just a start, but it'll get us somewhere, and we won't feel hopeless and powerless.
Well, thank you, Bo. I feel like that could inspire like some nice music. Maybe since we got all these new.
Oh no.
Accountability and attending. You don't have to be overwhelmed, dear friends.
Acknowledge that things have changed. Account for the fact that they don't mean what they used to mean. And attend to the actual lived reality of people impacted.
Amen. 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 Thank you for coming to the Theology Nerd Throwdown.
That worked. That worked.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been fun. Thank you, all of you that joined up live.
Yeah, thank you.
Reminder: I think we're really going to do the Bible verse thing next week.
We
got responses.
No, it'll be fun, and I'm getting a lot of responses here in my congregation too. So we're going to come up with a nice list.
All righty. Well,